Shall we start? Okay, it's 10:45. Good morning, everybody. A big welcome to you. I was not going to keep you from breakfast, not keep you from lunch, but I couldn't help the bottleneck you guys had to wade through. So I don't know how, but there's just seemed to be a very small way of 1,000 people want to go that way, and another 1,000 going to come this way through a little area. So I guess you're all learning how big conferences work for Microsoft. So welcome again. My name is Shreesh Dubey. I'm the Principal Program Manager for the backup products at Microsoft. And I have a colleague here with me, Vijay, who also is part of the same team. And both of us are going to talk about hybrid cloud backup, which essentially includes System Center DPM and Azure backup. How many of you guys here have used System Center DPM? Okay. How about Azure backup? Okay. So fair amount. I think we'll cover the overall pitch that we will walk through, what we consider hybrid cloud backup, that sort of talks about the integration of these two backup products to give you a seamless experience to protect your data in a hybrid environment. So that's the focus of our talk. So without further ado, let's start talking about what you might expect from this session. We want you to leave with the feeling, the understanding that we have a differentiated product offering in our backup, in a hybrid cloud backup story. It's also cost effective, and more importantly, it allows seamless protection across your private cloud and your public cloud. We believe most enterprises for the next decade are going to have a hybrid deployment. So having a story that protects them, all their infrastructure in this hybrid environment is going to be key to any backup product. So that's the three key takeaways for this session. Okay, so those of you that might have gone by our booth, you might have seen this pitch that we are talking about called availability on demand. The way we look at this is Azure offers us a very compelling platform. It's more than just a secondary data center. It's more than just cheap storage. It actually offers a platform on which we can actually offer differentiated offerings if you build the products the right way or the services the right way. So here we are trying to talk about two services that we have released, and both of them are in general availability. It's Azure Site Recovery and Azure Backup. And with these two services, our goal is to offer you very compelling use cases for Azure. And this just gives you a flavor of all the use cases that we have today. And I think our goal is to continue to enhance that. And the reason we can do that, again, as I went back to the story on the platform, Azure offers us a very rich platform, and we have built it from the ground up as services in Azure. So we can keep iteratively enhancing it. And even over the last year, we've added a lot of capabilities, and we'll continue to do that with these services to offer you the value of Azure. So let's talk a little bit about backup. So this is the backup as people understand it today. I think there's a famous thing that I read about the rule of 3-2-1. Essentially means you need to have 3 copies of your data on 2 different media, maybe 1 disk, 1 tape, and at least one of those copies off-site. This is traditional way of how people have implemented backup. It is how most corporations deploy it today. And what it basically entails is you need to have a local copy for your operational recovery. That you see is what I call operational backup. This is essentially your use cases for recovering lost data. You lost a file, you corrupted a DB. You need to get a very quick restore. Typically, this is called your operational backup. Then you need your offsite backup, which is typically for DR reasons or compliance reasons. It needs to be offsite. And in some places, it's mandated to be on a tape media. So again, you need to worry about how to get these backups on tape. So essentially, all of these components make up what today costs tape backup. And if you look at storage, you've heard the talks today in the keynote. I think Gurdeep's number I remember the most, of some 44 zettabytes in the next decade, with like 21 zeros on it. The cost of storage has not come down nearly to match the capacity at which it's growing. So for a backup admin, this is a nightmare of managing all this infrastructure. So clearly, the backup strategies have to evolve to deal with this large amount of storage. So it's expensive. Clearly, number 2 cost driver of IT spend is backup storage and tape infrastructure. Again, given the sites you need to manage, the tape process you need to manage, This is, again, a management TCO that you need to worry about as a backup admin. And then offsite backup, do you need an offsite data center just for backup? Oftentimes, you have one because of other reasons, and you can leverage it. But many companies, that's a big problem for them. How do they actually bring up another data center just for backup? So you've seen these use cases, you've seen these requirements, and in the landscape of where data continues to grow at a pace that is, if these things don't evolve and continue to grow, this is going to be a huge cost factor that you need to worry about. So no wonder people are looking at cloud as a way to try this out. And one of the things that cloud offers you is, of course, it's a low-risk way to try out the cloud. And today, if you look at most of the reports, they say backup is one of the key use cases for leveraging the public cloud. Why is that? Clearly, one is CapEx. There are the 3 public cloud vendors out there. They are buying storage and compute in capacities that can really give you guys the benefit of the cost savings. So clearly lower CapEx, and again, the same benefit of the scale you get with lower OpEx. And in the case of backup, you can actually look at the cloud as a way to replace your tapes. And later on in the demo, Vijay is going to share with you a report that was recently released by Gartner that talks about why cloud is a compelling alternative to tapes. So we'll discuss that in more detail then. But these are your benefits for what cloud can bring to your backup. And almost every sort of IT professional is sort of thinking about how to leverage the cloud, and backup becomes a very good use case. So this is the kind of premise and the promise that we had in our mind when we wanted to deliver hybrid cloud backup, is how can we help you guys leverage the cloud in a way that can give you these benefits. So before I go into that, I wanted to talk about, I was talking to an analyst the other day, and he said, yeah, everybody's looking to move to the cloud. Every backup vendor, every storage vendor, all of them are considering how to integrate cloud into their product strategy. And he came up with a good phrase. He said it's what I call good, better, best. And yes, everybody gives you a cloud offering, but they all fall into these sort of good, better, best ways of doing it. So the architecture, the point I want to make is the way you leverage the cloud in your product actually matters. When I say product, I mean the products and services that offer backup. So may it be a storage vendor that offers you backup, may it be a backup software that offers you backup. The way they integrate cloud, these are the 2 what I call the good and better ways of doing it. The first one is the easiest one. Almost every cloud, every backup product, and every storage vendor offers this, which is essentially treating cloud as a storage target. Where think of it as just another endpoint that you have in your product, and the data stays in the cloud. Well, it sounds fine, except when you think about what does it mean when you want to recover from backup. Well, it means you need to bring all the data back. There's no intelligence. It's almost like a tape copy sitting on a different media. So you have to pretty much bring it back on-premise before you can do anything useful with it, because all the intelligence to understand the data is actually sitting on-premise, because the storage is just like a tape data. So you need to retrieve the full copy. You need to bring all of it back. There's network costs associated with that. There's time associated with that. The slightly more evolved approach is to, let's say, run the backup software in an ISVM. So you're not running it on your infrastructure, but you're running it in the private cloud, or a public cloud, rather. This gives you the familiarity of the same software that you're used to on-premise, and it's running it in Azure. So the good thing is that it's familiar. It is what most people expect. Yeah, it's just running on Azure. Or a public cloud, for that matter. But then what do you do about the cost? Since it's not your infrastructure, who incurs the cost of running that compute? And I'll talk about that in the next slide, about comparing what it means to run a backup software in an ISVM. There are some implications. The other implication, again, is moving the data around when your backup software is running in the cloud. There are network costs associated with that. Either the data is between your account, your subscription, and the storage backend in Azure, so you incur network transfer costs in Azure. If you decide to go cross-geo, then you have egress costs to worry about. In some cases, custom backup products are also recommending that you bring the data back on-prem. So again, there's an egress cost with that. So any which way you look at that, if you use this approach, there are some implications to worry about. So we took a different approach. Obviously, you've heard this a lot in the conference today, cloud first. And we have taken what I consider, and even the analysts, when I talk to him, consider the best approach of using backup in the cloud and offering backup as a service. So our approach is to build Azure Backup as a first-class SaaS application. It's built really software as a service. It's a multi-tenanted service that runs in Azure, and it integrates with System Center DPM, very seamlessly to offer you a hybrid protection story. So you get low OpEx, low CapEx because you're leveraging, everything is running in Azure. You're not running your compute, you're not running your storage. All your elements are running in Azure. And there's no egress cost. Since all of this is run as part of the service, anytime you retrieve data from that service, there is no egress cost associated with that. Scale, yes, again, unlimited scale. There is no scale limits in how you can back up data. So whatever data you can bring to Azure, this service leverages the Azure Elastic storage in the back end and give you unlimited scale. Same thing for compute. If you want to do interesting things, like one of the things we're considering is deduplication in the cloud to optimize the storage. Now, there's a lot of compute that goes in to do that. Now, we can easily create that as a feature in our service to offer that value to you on the storage. So we could do those things in the cloud much more easily. And last but not the least, this is a single pane of glass management, and it offers you the ability to manage your deployments in either you're running it on-premise, you're running it in the cloud, or you're running hybrid, like in both environments. You can have a single place that you can look at all your backup processes in one place. Here is a table that I just pulled up that does a rough comparison of the second and the third approach. The second approach was you can run a backup software in an ISVM. Here I've taken the example of running it in an A4 VM. So first of all, an A4 VM has a limit of how many disks you can attach to it. So it's about 16 terabytes for an A4 VM. Well, you say, well, I can run more VMs. Okay, that's fine. You can have more VMs to scale out. However, each VM that you run costs around $500 a month to run. So that's expensive. Second is the data transfer. I mentioned that earlier. Since this compute VM is running in your subscription, anytime data leaves that subscription to either Azure storage or on-premise, there's a network transfer cost you have to bear. The customer subscription has to bear that. So net, yes, you're not leveraging the customer's infrastructure in that scenario, but your customer is paying for that backup infrastructure running in Azure. And if you compare that to Azure Backup, there is no storage limitation. It's unlimited. And both the compute cost as well as data transfer is included in the service. So for a subscription model, and I'll talk about that, what we have done to the pricing, it's a per instance protection licensing model where for each protected instance, you pay a very nominal monthly fee and storage at cost. Whatever storage Azure gives you, the cheapest storage category it gives you, you pay that at cost. That's the cheapest, most effective way to leverage the public cloud for your backup. So that's our approach, and we believe it has value today, and it has the legs to continue to give you value as we can add more and more value since we have all the service infrastructure in the cloud to enhance it. So this is the deployment I was mentioning earlier. When you talk about a hybrid deployment, you could either have your familiar enterprise on the right here where you see Data Protection Manager, which all your head office protection data is. This is the way you do the backups today. Then on the right is your branches where you have branch data. And then you might have some infrastructure running in the cloud, let's say in the ISVM. Today you moved some of your infrastructure in the cloud. All of these backup processes you can manage from one place. That's our value prop of this hybrid cloud backup. Doing it in one place instead of going into multiple places is a value we offer. And you could do it on-premise or you could do it in the cloud. We feel cloud is anywhere access, has unlimited scale, can be enhanced over time, has a much longer-term appeal as we take this approach forward. So we believe this will be a superior approach as we evolve backup in a hybrid cloud. Okay, I'll switch a little bit, I spent a bit of time explaining our approach, how we went about building this capability to give you the benefit of the cloud in the backups use cases. Now I'll talk about some specific use cases in backup where these scenarios will really resonate with you, or should resonate with you in terms of how it offers value to your customers. First is its traditional enterprise class backup. I think here I talked about tape. Almost like DPM, about 70% of DPM customers use tape for their backups, their offsite backups. Well, they can now consider cloud. And again, I said we'll share the data on why that's a compelling alternative. You can also minimize your storage. Since with tape, the restore times are quite high. So typically, we have 90 days of retention on-premise. With this approach, you could reduce that to as little as 7 days because you only need that for recovering data that's lost in the last 7 days. And traditionally, the statistics we have seen from our telemetry is 90% of the recoveries are from data that was created a week ago. So for all those, you could reduce your on-prem storage footprint. It gives you centralized management. You can manage all your backups from one place. And we have added this feature for workload backup. So all the workloads that you protect on-premise, you can seamlessly extend them to Azure. We started out with files and folders. We have recently extended it, the update role of 5. You can protect all your workloads like SharePoint, Exchange, SQL to Azure. So you get full range of support, full cloud estate replacement with the product today. So next is the more obvious one, branch office backup. Many companies out there, this is the reality. There are branches, and they're not very big. However, they need to be backed up. And there's investment that goes into these branch offices. I've talked to customers who have like small branches, like even store offices. They need to have some backup infrastructure. Some of our customers, we're going to do an interview with them tomorrow. They have about 140 branches across the country. And for them, every single branch, they have to deploy some infrastructure for local backup and also back that up to the head office. Well, if you have a cloud backup solution that they can work for them, they don't have to deploy that infrastructure. They can leverage the cloud. The other thing that people do concern themselves with is the bandwidth between the branch offices and the head office. Backup traffic is something that if they can avoid using that network for the backup traffic, they like that. So they can use the bandwidth between the branches and the head office for business critical data and leverage the public cloud, the WAN bandwidth for doing backups. And again, same thing I mentioned earlier, central management. Each of these scenarios, you will see me repeat that over and over again, that managing is something that you do once you set up the backup, that's what you do is manage it from a central location. So that's another benefit you get. This is a very interesting scenario. I don't know how many of you guys know the statistics, but even though backing up your laptops is a compliance requirement, there's only like 8 or 9% of companies that actually mandate that for their customers. And the reason for that is really the infrastructure that they have to provision to back up client storage. This is the biggest cost factor that they worry about. Today, laptops is very common to get a terabyte drive in a laptop. Now imagine you have 10,000 employees, each with a terabyte laptop. The storage just adds up when you do client backup. They would really love it if that backup is not stored on-premise. The second is the network that they use. Today, you can get cheaper networks that are in your own homes, and you can do backup. So if there's a scenario where you don't have to provision storage, and customers can back up their laptops, either they're sitting at the airport, in a hotel room, or wherever they are, then it's a great gift for the IT administrators. They can deploy backup. All they really care about is the data encrypted? Is it safe? Can I enforce policies? If they can do that, then this is a great scenario for them to light up client backup. I have several customers that are talking to me about this scenario, and they have some asks from our product in terms of management. They would like to do some more management. Today, we don't have all the management capabilities are needed. However, the end user workflows are pretty complete. In fact, I have my laptop that backs up twice a day, and I never notice it. It just, whenever it finds a network, it just backs it up. I have pointing it to my documents folder, which has 20 GB on it. All my documents are stored there, encrypted, safe. Whenever I want to recover anything, I can easily go do that. So it's a very good scenario when you put cloud in the perspective. And I expect a lot of companies will want to go do this. In fact, there are a couple of startups that have come up specifically targeting this scenario, and they call it D2C, disk to cloud. Okay, this is another interesting scenario. As the public cloud is picking up, people are moving more and more of the infrastructure in the cloud. Initially, the promise of the public cloud was, well, we do geo-replication, we do local storage replication. Why do you need backup? It turns out people still want backup because that's redundancy at a storage level, kind of like RAID. Just because you have RAID on-prem doesn't mean you don't need backup. So that's the realization customers are asking, and they're demanding that they get the same level of backup assurances when they run the infrastructure in the cloud. So that's the value prop that we offer in this service, and we just announced preview of this a couple of weeks back, where you can back up an ISVM, and you pretty much get the same level of capabilities that you would when your VM is running on-premise. It's like fabric level protection, where you leverage the Azure Fabric to do the backup. And again, since it's a service, there is no customer resources that are used, like compute or network. All of that is handled by the service. And you get the same level of backup for your ISVM running in the cloud. Okay, so just to recap, these are the scenarios where when you have a hybrid cloud deployment, you should expect the way backups are to work, and we have built these scenarios in our feature, and we'll walk through some of the demos. I'll hand this over to Vijay, who will show you some of these demos of how you can light up these scenarios.
Okay. Everyone can hear me? Okay. All right, cool. Let me get started with my first demo. In the first demo, I'm actually going to demonstrate the power of cloud and show you how to recover data that is backed up to Azure from anywhere. Okay? So let me switch to the machine here. Okay, I have two branch offices that are backing up data to Azure, to the same Azure backup vault. And the first branch office, I'm calling it ADR test 1. And the second branch office, I'm calling it as ADR test 2. And on ADR test 1, I have a few workloads that I'm backing up to Azure. I have a few databases and a few file folders that I'm backing up to Azure. Okay, and let's say that I want to recover some data from my branch office to the alternate or the secondary branch office. Let's say I want to share my database to the second branch office for some dev test scenarios. Or if my primary branch office went down and I don't have my data, I want to recover that data, can I do that from my alternate or the secondary branch office? That's all possible because both these branch offices are backed up to Azure. Let me show you how. So I can just jump into the second branch office right here, ADR test 2. All I do is click on Add External DPM Server, specify the credentials, and what this does is actually connects to Azure, fetches all the DPM servers that are registered to this Azure Backup Vault, downloads the list of DPM servers, and once I get that data, I can just pick the DPM server that I want to retrieve the data from. That's the ADR test 1. And I specify the passphrase. Okay, what this does is actually connects to Azure. Now for the particular DPM server that I backed up my data to Azure, it fetches all the data sources that are backed up along with the metadata that I need to do the recovery process. Okay, now that's done, I can simply go browse and find the external DPM server. Okay, 1 second, it's coming up. Okay, there you see, there's an external DPM server that's connected, that I'm connected from my secondary DPM server. I can browse for all the data sources that are part of that DPM server, right there. I can see my file folders that are backed up to Azure. I can simply click on the file folder that I want to recover. Now what it does is actually finds all the recovery points that are backed up from the primary DPM server to Azure, retrieves those list of recovery points, and I can simply click on this, the folder that I'm interested in, and I can simply kick off the recovery process. So there you have it. So you have data on your primary backup server, DPM server, that's backed up to Azure. And if I had lost my site, I lost my branch office, I can go to the secondary DPM server, connect to my Azure Backup Cloud, add the DPM server that I'm interested in, recover any data that I want in case of a disaster, or if I simply want to share my data, I can just retrieve that data from my secondary branch office. So I can say next, choose the location where I want to recover the data, and okay, it's taking a little time here. Okay, for some reason this is slow. Okay, there you go. I just want to recover the data to my E drive and kick off the recovery process. And off I go. So now I have the data that I backed up from DPM 1 down to DPM 2 just because I'm connected both to the same Azure Backup Vault. Okay, let me switch gears here to the next part. Okay. So Srish already talked about long-term retention, and he also mentioned the fact that 90% of all the restores that customers need happen within like the first 7 days or the 30 days of backup that you're doing, right? So you have a lot of restore scenarios that happen, but you need the data, mostly the latest copy of your data or data that's maybe 7 days old. But you still need to store all your long-term retention data somewhere, right? People use tape for that, but that's going to be an expensive proposition where you can easily leverage Azure as your cloud target for your backup storage for your long-term retention. So what's the benefit there, right? First off, you actually inherently get the capability that it's offsite. So you have offsite backup. You can use it for long-term retention because you can store the data for much longer. There's no scale limits in terms of how much data you can store in your Azure. Third thing I talked about just a minute ago, where you can recover data anywhere. So once the data is all in Azure, you can actually recover the data anywhere. So it really kills, with just one stone, I can kill like 3 birds, you know? And I can meet my business needs, my legal and compliance needs, and at a much reduced cost. You know, that's really the power of using Azure Backup here. So what's the really the comparison between Azure Backup or the cloud and tape? This is what Gartner had to say, right? So there is a reference to an article that you guys should have access to in a week or so. We're going to publish the link to this article in our website. But really, essentially, what it says is the fact that even though tape is a very inexpensive media that you can buy, however, the cost of administering or managing your tape infrastructure can be very expensive. That's precisely where Azure Backup can be a very compelling value proposition for a customer. Okay? Let me just jump into the demo and show you how you can leverage Azure Backup for your long-term retention. So I can go back to the, one second. So I can go back to the machine that I've been backing up to Azure. I can simply click on Modify Protection Group. I can go through these screens where I want to specify the long-term retention intent. One second. All right, there you go. So here you have the opportunity to specify your long-term retention intent. You can actually specify how frequently you want to back up your data to Azure. You can do it daily, weekly, monthly, or yearly. And once you've done that, you can specify what kind of retention policy that you want to preserve, right? So you can either store your data for like many days. Like typically what we see is customers store their data for 365 days or like 30 days, depending on what kind of business they're running. And they want to also keep monthly copies, like for 12 months or 60 months. And then they want to keep yearly copies that they want to retain for like 7 years, 10 years, maybe even 99 years, right? We have some customers who are really knocking on our door saying, hey, we want support for 35 years, 40 years because of their legal and compliance needs. So really, because of the unlimited scale that we have in Azure, you can actually store this data forever, right? So that's really how you can just simply configure long-term retention for your Azure backup, right? So you can do this either for your data that's being backed up from DPM to Azure, also for data that is backed up directly from your Windows Server file folders directly to Azure. So you can do that, both of these in the same very similar way. Okay, let me now switch back to okay. So I want to touch upon a few things that really matter when you think about how do I use Azure Backup for my long-term retention. The first thing is about the pricing model, right? We made some changes to pricing model. I'll talk about that. What about networking and security? How do I make sure that the Azure Backup doesn't impact my network? How does it not impact my, is it really compliant in terms of security and things like that? And what's the story on the workload support? So those are the 3 things I'm going to touch upon. First thing is about the pricing model change. So on April 1st, we actually announced a change in the pricing model that enables customers to leverage Azure Backup as a very compelling long-term retention story, right? So we had 2 principles that we want to make sure that customers get benefit from. The first thing is it has to be economical, right? So the whole value prop of cheap storage in Azure, It needs to be economical for long-term retention. Second thing is you want to make it flexible. Why do I say flexible? Because customers can choose the kind of storage that they need for their backup storage, right? Some customers who are, who just want some kind of a storage in Azure, they can just use locally redundant storage. Whereas some customers who want the extra level of protection for their data and they want to have geographic resiliency, they can choose the geo-redundant storage. So it's really up to the customer to choose the kind of storage that they need for their backup business, right? So I have some customers who say, my business critical data, I'll store it in GRS storage, whereas my not so critical data, I want to just keep it there in Azure as just a single copy. I'm okay with LRS storage. With LRS storage, obviously you get much more lower cost compared to GRS, but that's the choice that we want to give customers. And how did we break that, give both the economy and the flexibility, is by introducing a new model where we really separated the storage and the software pricing, right? So for the software piece, we actually charge something like $10 per protected instance, depending on the scale of the data source. And the storage is at raw cost to the customer, right? So whatever is the Azure storage cost is directly passed through to the customer when they try to use the Azure backup, right? And we also made sure that the instance that we protect is actually scalable, right? So if you have really, really small data sources that you want to protect, like files and folders from a client machine, you want to make sure that the pricing model scales for those smaller segments. At the same time, when you have large SharePoint farms that you want to protect, we obviously want to make sure that we give compelling value at a very competitive price for the customer, okay? So here's a link to the pricing change that we made, and there are more details on how the pricing model can be leveraged by customers that we published. And here's a comparison chart that we just did to show you the benefits of using Azure Backup with the new pricing model. So here's the illustration where we talk about customers who have like 100 gigabytes of data doing a churn for like 1% every day. And if they keep the data for like 360 days, they get a savings of about 77%, right? Another kind of meta point I want to just hit on is if a customer has 100 terabytes of data, maybe 100 instances of that, the cost per GB for the customer for storing the long-term retention data happens to be like 4.5 cents. And how is that possible? That's because as you keep more and more data in Azure, the cost of your protected instance really amortizes with the time, right? So that's kind of where the key, it becomes a very key value prop for the customer. Okay, so the next thing I want to touch upon is the network impact, right? How does Azure Backup work, and what's the impact on the network, right? First of all, I would like to say that Azure Backup, when we do the backup, it is making sure only the Delta changes are backed up to Azure, and we also make sure that the data before it leaves the machine, it compresses the data. We see anywhere from 30 to 50% compression as we send the data to Azure. The second part is the network security. Obviously, as customers want to protect the data to Azure, they want to have the peace of mind that the data, when it leaves their on-premises, is secure, right? So we make sure that the data is encrypted, and when the data is backed up to Azure, the customer keeps hold of his data, and the passphrase is never shared with Azure for any of these scenarios, right? So that's a key value prop that I want to drive as part of the implementing Azure Backup. This is another capability that Azure has really announced several months ago, where customers can start leveraging Azure Express Route to connect their on-premises data centers to Azure, right? What this gives you is a very reliable and secure way to connect your Azure on-premises to your Azure. And in the context of backup, it's very important to think about this because it enables customers to have much reduced backup time, reduced restore time at a very low cost, really. So this is key because if you think about if you want to back up like 1 terabyte of data to Azure, without something like ExpressRoute, it can take many days, like a week to send the data. But with the ExpressRoute, you can actually get much reduced time in terms of the time it takes for the backup to succeed, right? So this is very key in terms of your deployment. This is something that we're still fine-tuning in our product. We don't have the full capability yet, but this is something that we're working on as part of our commitment to make sure that the network support is really great when it talks about on-premises backup to Azure. And for customers who are like not investing hugely in terms of ExpressRoute, how can they send their initial copy of data from on-premises to Azure, right? So what we've done is with the Azure Backup, we've integrated the data, the service to Azure import-export service such that customers can take their on-premises data, put it in a removable media like a SATA drive, send that data over to Azure, through courier service. And once the data reaches Azure, the Azure Backup automatically senses that the data has arrived in Azure and sucks that data into the Azure Backup Vault. All of this done very seamlessly from the customer on-premises to Azure. Okay, so the last part I was going to talk about is the capability to protect workloads from on-premises to Azure. What are the workloads that we support? So as Sirish mentioned earlier, up to UR5, we actually did not support Exchange, SharePoint, and client workloads to Azure, but that's support that we've added in UR5 that was rolled out in February of this year. So now we have the ability to protect all workloads, pretty much Microsoft Exchange, SharePoint, SQL Server, Hyper-V, all of these workloads from on-premises to Azure. And it's also critical to know that it's not just limited for physical machines. It can work for virtual machines, like in a hypervisor environment. Also, when you think about environments like in a VMware environment. So with VMware, if you have your Microsoft workloads deployed in a VMware environment, you can install an agent in the VMware VM and back up the same data to Azure. So pretty much you get the capability across the various clouds that customers are using today. Okay, so let me just jump into SharePoint. So how many of you actually use DPM with SharePoint today? Okay, a few hands up there. Okay, so I talked about the enhanced support now that we have with protecting multiple workloads to Azure. As part of that commitment, I'm just going to show you how you can use Azure Backup and DPM to back up data to cloud, and also, more importantly, how do I recover the data from cloud? Okay, so here I have a DPM server that's protecting data, and I have the SharePoint farm backed up to Azure. So I can simply go to the protection group, and I can see that I've enabled the data protection to Azure. And once I go to the go to the screens, you'll see that I've configured for long-term retention. Okay, there you go. So I'm doing a daily backup, and I'm also specifying that I want to keep this data for like 60 months. So pretty much I can expand the horizon of amount of data that I can store in Azure. And let me just finish the screen here. So since it's already set up, I'm just going to move on to the recovery phase. So if I go to the recovery, now I have two choices, right? So I talked about earlier that 90% of your restores happen within the first few days, like within the previous recovery point or the recovery points that are 7 days ago. For such scenarios, you can still leverage your disk as your storage media and then recover data. For disk recovery, you could simply go to the SharePoint search folder. You can even type the wildcard, and it'll actually find out what are the list of items that are present in each of these SharePoint recovery points. So if I have multiple files and folders backed up as part of my farm, I'm able to easily find out what are the files and folders associated with each of the recovery points, and it's able to list me that data. And I can simply go, this is the item that I want to recover. I can simply click on recover, and I can go off from there. However, if I have a situation where my SharePoint form blew up, or I have my content DB is now corrupted, but I want the data to be recovered from Azure, I could do that too. How do I do that? So I can go back to my recovery tab. I can click on the content DB. Now you can see that I have the option to select either the disk recovery point or the online recovery point. So I can choose the online recovery point and pick the content DB that I want to recover, and I can go start the recovery process. It's that simple. So I can do disk-based recovery for my short-term retention, or I can use the cloud as my long-term target and do recovery of my content DB in case there was any kind of disaster situation, my content DB was blown up. Okay. So let me move on to the next section. Okay, just to recap, so we talked about how to recover data to an alternate site. We talked about how you can use the Azure backup for your long-term retention. We talked about the choice of LRS or GRS storage, depending on the kind of business that you're running. And we also talked about the full workload support. So now let me switch over to protecting Azure IaaS VMs. So as Srish mentioned, when we actually started this project, there were a lot of folks who asked us, hey, why do I need backup in Azure, right? Isn't Azure already highly available? There's geo-redundant storage. Why do I need to do backup? But the truth is that even though you have a geo-redundant storage where you have like 6 copies of data in Azure, if you have any kind of software corruption or data loss, you accidentally deleted some data from your workloads, that sort of an action or the software corruption gets replicated 5 times. So there's no way to recover data if such a situation happened. That's precisely why we actually thought about building Azure IaaS VM protection. So with that said, a lot of people were very creative and started doing things on their own, right, with Azure, like trying to protect workloads, trying to copy blobs and things like that, right, today, before this preview feature came on. But here are the downsides with that. First thing is, if you need application consistency, right, if you want to make sure that your workload, when I do the backup and I do the recovery process will actually work, there's no way to guarantee that if you just do a copy blob, right? So you have to actually shut down your workloads before you do the backup. And that means that you have downtime for your workloads. And if you're really thinking about moving your workloads to cloud, going enterprise scale 24/7, that's not acceptable. Okay? So I talked about application consistency, right? So if I don't do my backups during the downtime or the shutdown time, I don't get application consistency. So really, I'm really struggling here, right? And the most important thing is people equate copying blobs or storing blobs in an offsite location as a way of doing backups. But that's really cumbersome because you got to manage all your blobs. You need to manage the life cycle of your blobs. You need to make sure your recovery points are all intact, and you need to purge them. You need to clean up. As you start to scale from 10, 15, 20 virtual machines up to like hundreds of virtual machines, this becomes a really daunting task. So what did we solve with Azure IaaS VM Backup? The first use case that we wanted to solve was make sure that customers can protect themselves from a data loss scenario, right? If they had a corruption, a software corruption, if you're doing a patch, before you're doing a patch, you can back up your workloads using IaaS VM Backup and then proceed. The second use case that we addressed was the ability to recover your VM although your VM might be deleted. So we want to make sure that your backups and your production workloads are separated. So even if you delete your virtual machine, your backups are not compromised, really. And obviously, the fact that you actually have a backup copy, that you can use that same backup copy to do the recovery, right? You can create a copy of the virtual machine. We're even considering adding the capability to do a geo recovery in case you have geo-redundant storage. This we don't have today, but you can make a copy of your virtual machine within the same geo. So let me jump into the demo. Okay. So here, okay, one second. Let me just. All right. So here I have a bunch of virtual machines that I have registered with the Azure Backup Vault. What this enables me to do is, like I said, even though I might have deleted my virtual machine from my primary subscription, given the fact that these VMs are registered with the Azure Backup Vault, I can retain the backup data even though the VM is deleted. So that's really the impact of having a way to register the VM with the Azure Backup Vault. Once I've done that, I can simply go to the Protect tab, and I can choose my virtual machines that I want to back up, and click Next. And I can choose the protection policy that I want to use. So in this case, I have already created a protection policy. And in this protection policy, I've made sure that I can back up daily, and I can choose a retention range of 30 days. This is something that we're working on to enhance this much more, make it more richer for customers to leverage data for long-term retention, even when they're backing up data in Azure. I can click Next. And once the protection process is started, I can go to the Jobs view, and I can see all my backup jobs that are running as part of the portal. And I can filter the data based on the type of jobs that are running. I can just look for the in-progress jobs. I can look at completed jobs. And I can also do the type of filter it based on the type of job, like it's a backup job or a restore job. So all the job monitoring infrastructure is built right here in the Azure portal. And the key thing I want you guys to also walk away with is the fact that we're making investments in the Azure portal such that not only can you protect your virtual machines that are backing up within Azure, but we're moving in a direction where we want to start managing more workloads that are back up even from on-premises to Azure to the Azure portal. So you get a way to do central management of all your backup tasks right there from the Azure portal. So that's a directional change that we're actually starting to invest in. Okay, so let me jump to the PowerPoint. Okay, so what is so differentiated about the Azure backup, right? So we talked about the policies, protection, and everything, right? So why is this very, very appealing for the customer? First thing is you want to make sure that when the workload is backed up, we're not impacting taking any impact on the production workload. We want to make sure the IOPS or the throughput that the workload is experiencing is not impacted. That's the first thing we want to make sure. Second thing is when we actually do the backup, we want to make sure that the snapshots that we take are, we only send the delta changes that are captured between any two recovery points and back up only the delta changes to Azure. And as we start sending these changes, we want to start leveraging the power of Azure storage to make sure that the data that you keep on the Azure Backup Vault is efficient in terms of storage. So for the first time when we send the data, we make sure that we create a recovery point which has references to all the storage data blocks that are as part of the backup storage. But then the next time we send another piece of data, we don't create multiple copies of the data. We only keep the incremental data as part of your Azure Backup storage, right? So as a new recovery point is created, we just update the references to point to the new data blocks that have been allocated that are really changes between two recovery points, and so on and so forth. So really what the benefit for the customer is, we actually make sure that the data backup, the backup process is efficient. We compute the differences between two recovery points, and also make sure that when we store the data in Azure Backup, the data is really efficient in terms of storage. As part of the GA, so we actually released a preview on 3/26, and as part of the GA plan, we're expanding to more geos. Today, it's pretty much in all geos we have, but we don't have this deployed on the US central regions. This is something that we've heard a lot of customers ask. So we're expanding to the US central regions in this month. We're also building the PowerShell support. So all these capabilities that you saw in the management portal, customers are asking for us, hey, we need the way to script this, deploy this in my environment. As the scale grows, I need a way to script it. So we're working on that. Reporting and alerting, this is a capability that people are asking for, and also have a way to define or not define policies, just use built-in policies as part of your backup infrastructure. Hyper-V protection. So we talked about cloud. We talked about backing up from on-premises to Azure, protecting within Azure? What about on-premises data? How are we making sure that if you're not really Azure bound, what is your investment strategy there, right? So we're really committed making sure that all our investments that we continue to make for your protection of your on-premises data. So last year, we actually made a big announcement with the CPS, the Cloud Platform Stack. I don't know if any of you guys are using it today. Any raise of hands? Anybody heard about it, using it in their deployment today? Okay, a few hands up there. So as part of that commitment, what we did is make sure that all the work that we're doing as part of the Cloud Platform Stack, making sure that those capabilities are available for general public, right? So whether you're using the CPS rack for your production deployment or not, you want to make sure that all those capabilities are available to the customers outside of CPS. So first thing is we actually announced the availability of deduplication support for customers to leverage, right, with the Windows dedupe stack, right? And we actually have a testimonial from a customer who said that when they deployed the Windows Server deduplication with SOFS and DPM together, they actually got 74% deduplication savings as part of their deployment. And we have a case study that you can use as a reference to talk about to your customers when they start to deploy DPM with Windows Server deduplication technology. And we continue to enhance this DPM product for your on-premises protection. So we actually released a reporting pack as part of our UR5 update. And the reporting pack allows you as customers to actually have a consolidated way to report all of your infrastructure across multiple DPM servers. So if you have a large deployment, many DPM servers, you get a centralized way to monitor and get a report of all your backup infrastructure from one place. And as part of that, we also added the deduplication support and tells you how much deduplication savings you're getting from your infrastructure. And one of the other common requests that we've heard from customers is, how do I leverage deduplication even outside of a SOFS deployment? Can I use deduplication with direct attached storage? That's something we've heard a lot from customers. And I have John in the audience here. We're working together to make sure that we are actually able to deploy the deduplication on the direct attached storage and use DPM virtual machine in your deployment architecture to back up and store, have efficient storage as part of that. And so stay tuned for this as we publish an article on the direct attached storage. And as we move forward, right, with Windows Server vNext, we keep making more enhancements to the deduplication stack. The first thing I want to call out is the ability to span more than 1 terabyte of disk. Today, for deduplication, the volume that we work with is like 1 terabyte VHD. But as we kind of grow, we can start expanding to like up to 64 terabytes of disk for your deduplication volume. Another key capability we're working on for Windows Server Next is the ability to use multi-threaded deduplication so that your deduplication time can be much reduced, and you can complete the deduplication task in a much shorter time. Processing, again, deduplication, we want to make sure that it can scale as you add more compute or memory resources. The deduplication algorithm actually scales with your with the hardware, and also make sure that the interface, the user interface for configuring dedupe is much more simplified. So those are some of the key takeaways or the capabilities that we're building as part of our Windows Server Next to enhance our DPM story with the deduplication. Okay, so for the last demo, let me just switch. Oh, okay. Can I take the question at the end?
We'll have 10 minutes.
Yeah, so, yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay, so for the last demo, I'm going to call upon Srish also here. So Srish, do you see anything different on the screen?
No.
Okay. This looks ordinary to you?
It looks like a DPM PG protection group that you're going to set up protection for some.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Do
don't
you
see
see
any.
anything different? What about this green icon? Does it look familiar to you?
Oh, no. What is that? I don't know what the green icon is. Anybody
Okay.
know what the green icon is? Okay, yes, it is VMware.
Okay, so yes, we are about to announce the ability to start backing up your VMware vSphere, your VMware VMs using DPM. So that's the takeaway there. The best part is that now with DPM, you actually will not notice any difference in terms of backing up a Hyper-V VM or a VMware VM. That's really the message here, right? So all the capabilities that you get with VMware, with Hyper-V protection, let's say you want to back up to disk, back up to tape, back up to cloud, all of those capabilities will be just extended for VMware VMs. And to top it off, we are also making sure that we leverage some of the inherent capabilities of VMware to make it even better. So first thing is we'll make it agentless because we don't need to deploy any agents in each of these EXX hosts, and you can do a direct backup using the VADP API. Second thing is we want to make sure that customers can leverage the benefits of folder-level protection. So with the folder-level protection, I can actually make sure that even if I add more virtual machines to my folder, those VMs automatically get protected as part of the VMware setup. So let me show you how easy it is to set up VMware backup, VM backup. So here I have a few virtual machines that are backed up with VMware. And let me just add a few more here. So all I do is click New. It's the same familiar DPM console that you all used to. I just go Browse. And here I have a machine that's a ESX host that I'm connected to. So this could be an ESX host or a vCenter host. So depending on what kind of deployment you have, we can go discover virtual machines that are part of VMware ESX or vCenter. I can find the virtual machines that I want to back up. As I mentioned earlier, you can back up at per VM level, or I can just pick the entire folder that I want to back up. That includes the current set of virtual machines. Here, I can click Next. And as I mentioned earlier, I can actually do the protection in the same way, the same consistent way I do Hyper-V VM backup. So I can back up to disk, I can back up to tape, I can also back up to cloud with the VMware VM backup. So let me go on. And as I mentioned earlier, I can choose long-term retention. I can choose this VM here. Okay, so I can choose my backup schedule, and also I can choose the long-term retention. So again, the same value prop that I talked about earlier about long-term retention and how I can leverage cloud, how I can do DR across branch offices, all of those things that I mentioned earlier, you can just do exactly the same thing with VMware VM backup. And that's really the power of leveraging cloud and the best of the capabilities of on-prem DPM protection coming together. Srish?
Thank you. Thank you for the applause in the middle as well. I was talking to an analyst, and he said there are exactly 2 companies on the planet that can say, I only back up my products, my platform. One was DPM, and one was VMware. They only back up infrastructure, virtual machines on the environment. Well, we just took that reason away, as you just saw. This is right now just an announcement. We plan to have a preview of it with the next update roll-up of DPM. So we'll see what you see there, and the biggest value that we want to offer is seamlessness. It actually works just like any other virtual machine. You point it to an ESX host or a vCenter environment, and you get all the backup. So let me switch over and talk a few more things. We are writing a book, actually, believe it or not. And it's interesting, this book is not released yet, but we're going to have it done in about maybe this month, I'm hoping. But no later than this fiscal year, so no later than June is my hope, but maybe sooner. These are the chapters. You can see it covers pretty much as we see hybrid cloud backup. We're evolving the way we want to imagine backup. These are the topics. And the interesting story about VMware backup, I had a chapter written for it, and it was very interesting. I couldn't fill it up because it's the same. So the guy, our publisher, said, hey, you need to at least write 3 or 4 pages. I cannot have a chapter for a book that has just a page. So I struggled, but finally I convinced him that that is the value, that it's really very similar to Hyper-V Backup. So yeah, you'll see that chapter there, chapter 6. So I think this book will be ready. It's free. It's the ebook series of System Center. So we'll be launching that as well. All the authors you see down here, Vijay, myself, and 2 more colleagues on my team back in India are writing this book along with Mitch, who's the editor. So that's another announcement. I think this is the only point I want to make over here is starting 2012, 2013 actually, we started to build more and more capabilities in our backup. We realized that the cloud offers an opportunity to reinvent how we think backup. And we started to invest in it more aggressively. And as you see, the number of items we have added over the last year and a half has grown, and we expect it to continue to grow. So our journey has just started a year and a half ago, and we continue to build on and make it a really enterprise credible backup product that we are trying to build. So again, key takeaways, as I mentioned earlier, we want to build a differentiated backup story for the hybrid cloud that's cost effective and really works across all your clouds. That's the reality of infrastructure as you know it. So that's something, a promise that we want to deliver in our solution. One thing I want to mention, for those of you guys that are DPM customers that are interested in a deeper conversation and want to look at the roadmap and what other things we are planning and also give us feedback, we have a focus group that is scheduled tomorrow in the morning at 9 o'clock. And those of you that are interested, it's only got 30 seats in it because it's a small room. Believe it or not, this conference is so huge, but to get a room had been very difficult. So I couldn't get a big room, so I can only fit 30 people. So I have invitation cards here if you guys are interested to come, want to talk to us about DPM feedback, what you'd like to see in the product going forward. We'll also share our roadmap with you. So please join us tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And that's the venue here. And I have cards here that you can walk up and take. These are some resources that you can look at. And more importantly, there are a couple of sessions I don't want you guys to miss. There are a couple of our MVP friends here and one MVP turned PFE. They are taking a session today at 5 o'clock. It's called Enterprise Backup. So what we presented is features. These guys are going to present what it takes to deploy it in the field. So reporting, Vijay talked about reporting. We have built it with a promise that you can extend it and make it as rich. In fact, the picture that I showed up there is actually not possible in the product today. You need to do a lot of things to make it look that good. So he'll show you how to do that. The other thing is about backup as a service. Again, how to use all the capabilities we have built to really build a backup as a service in the real world. And then last but not the least, Islam will talk about some of the deployments in the real world where we have taken customers who have actually replaced their tapes with cloud backup and what challenges they have run into, what are the experiences, what are the key learnings. So absolutely, I know it's a 5 o'clock session, but I really, really encourage you to take it. You'll learn a lot more. It'll round out what you learn from both these sessions. And that's pretty much it. Don't forget to do the evals. It's a feedback. We always look for feedback. Do write your comments. We like to make these things as interactive, as valuable to you as possible. So thank you again. And if you have questions now, please use the mic so they get recorded. I apologize for the gentleman over there. I don't know if he's still around. We couldn't want to take questions in the middle, but yeah, if you can take questions now, please take the mic and we'll do the best, and we'll stay back afterwards too as well to answer questions.
No, we can't hear you actually.
VMware, do you have to put a client, an agent on to each of them, or just on the ESX host? How does that portion work?
As I mentioned, it's an agentless backup, so we're going to do directly backup, from DPM.
VMware backup the application aware like Exchange SQL, or is there going to be an agent for that?
So as I mentioned earlier, so you can do VM level backup using the new capability we're adding. But previously, we had actually announced the support to backup workloads directly by installing an agent inside the VM. So if you have a Exchange workload or a SharePoint workload inside the VMware VM, you can back that up. But that requires an agent because it needs to discover the workload.
Yeah, that's a traditional. We would have to install an agent in the virtual machine if you want workload backup. But what are the key gaps we heard customers asking? They want the VM backup as well. And they didn't want to have another product to go do that with. So we wanted to add that capability. So yeah, it is agentless in the sense there's no agents Like in DPM, you have to install agents on the hosts. VMware Hypervisor gives the capability to directly back up from the DPM server itself. So yeah, question.
Could you please give us a prospect about the single file limitation to backup to Azure?
The file limitation.
Yes, means if you have a big workload, for example, a file server, the file size you have to
Yes, the
is
1.65 terabyte
big.
limit.
Yeah.
Yes, so that's going away. We actually use VHD to stream the data from on-premise to Azure. So that has a VHD limitation. We're going to make it VHDX. So right in our June timeframe, it's going up to 60 terabytes. So you won't have the problem starting June. So we're going to get that. But that having been said, it's not the file server size that's the limit. It's the size of the volume. So you could have a 5 terabyte file server, but each of the volumes in the file server can't be more than 1.65 terabytes today. That's the limitation, but we're going to get that fixed in by June, by the June release of the service. Good question.
Okay.
Any plans to add other Azure data services like table storage or native blob storage for backup?
So we actually are thinking about that. So we've heard a lot of customers ask about, hey, I want to protect my entire application, and it's not the virtual machines. So certainly something that is in our radar, but we can even connect offline to sort of understand what you're really looking for, in terms of that. So
This is one of the things we mentioned earlier. Because we have built a service in Azure, our goal is to eventually extend that. So we're looking at SQL Pass as a first application, but our goal is to be able to protect all Azure assets. So, good question.
okay, go ahead.
Hi. Is it also possible to, when you, for example, make an Azure backup from a VM in Azure IaaS, to have that backup back to on-prem?
You mean you want to back up Azure IaaS VM to
on-premise?
No, when you make a backup in Azure from a VM, right? From
Yeah,
Azure VM. And can you use that backup data also on-prem?
Yeah, so as part of GA, we're thinking about an ability to sort of download the data. So as a one-off copy. So that'll address the question of, hey, I want just a copy of the data. But I'd like to have
Is it a question of backup or a restore?
Yeah.
Are you asking, do you want to back it up to on-premise, or do you want to restore it?
I want to, for example, when I have my Azure VM, I want to make a backup of it and then restore it to an on-premise.
Restore. Yes, that's
that we're looking at.
Yeah.
So the fact that you can restore a VHD or data part of data, yes, that's certainly a part of our plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
That's part of our GA plan. Yes, good question.
The backing up the VM in Azure through the Azure portal, is that available now?
Yes, it's available in preview, so you can go check it out today.
Okay.
So it's ready to use. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, we have several thousand VMs already being protected that way. So yeah, you should feel free to try it out. It's available in preview.
So all you got to do is just register the VMs to the backup vault, and you get started. So.
Okay, because I was just checking on my Azure subscription or the portal. It wasn't listed on.
Yeah, it's not in the VM create workflow. So yeah, go read the blog. We are trying to fix that for GA as well. Our ultimate experience, we want it to be in the VM create workflow, where you see it as part of your VM creation. I want backup. Right now, you have to actually register the VM, then go to your vault, and then it discovers it, and there you add the backup. So it's not exactly discoverable. If you're looking in the VM create workflow, you won't find it. But that's something we'll fix by GA as well. So it'll be very easy for you to see it right there. As I create my VM, do I want backup or not? But try it. There's a blog that explains how to do that. It's a 3-step process.
Question.
Hi, what's the cost basis for backup as a service? Is it just the amount of time that the jobs are running?
No, it's actually by protected instance. So it's what instance you are protecting. So if it's a virtual machine, or it's a file server, or it's SQL DBs, the unit that we use is a protected instance, and it varies based on the size of the front-end unit. So if it's, let's say, up to 50 GB, it's $5. I'm talking US currencies per protected instance per month. From 50 to 500, it's $10. And then every 500 GB increment beyond that is an additional $10. And that's flat per month. That's essentially what you would pay to protect it. Now, amount of data that you store in Azure, and depending on how long you store it, that's a separate bill that you get from Azure for storage. And that's, as I mentioned earlier, we give you the choice of LRS storage, blob, which is the cheapest storage you can get in Azure, or GRS is slightly more expensive. So that's how we have broken the model starting April. Previously, if you guys don't know, the model was a flat add-on, 20 cents a GB of storage, which didn't scale very well for large amounts of data.
Any plans to integrate DPM with StoreSimple to be a target, to get benefit from whatever StoreSimple is doing, deduplication and moving data to the cloud?
We actually looked into that. That's a great question. You know, when customers look at StoreSimple as an appliance, the question often comes up, what if I use that as a backup storage? That actually right now is not a very optimal use case. We tried that scenarios and tested it, but we decided not to support it because you don't get the optimal saving. The dedupe savings that you get and the restore times that you get with that scenario is not optimal for that use case. So what we basically, we haven't certified that right now as a backup storage target, although some customers have tried to use it. And the primary use case for that is not necessarily deduplication, it's really the tiering. People look at that as saying, I can get tiering from that device. And essentially with the backup storage that goes into the device and the tiering that it does, those things don't work too well for backup I/O. So you lose out on some of those benefits. So we really look at StoreSimple as a primary storage device that also gives you backup and tiered storage. That's really the sweet spot for StoreSimple. But oftentimes customers try to use it for backup storage and then they run into this situation. Although, DPM has issues working with that. The way it writes storage, it doesn't work too well. But there are other backup products that have certified it, like Veeam has. But yeah, we haven't in DPM.
Are you planning to add any additional workloads like we heard today, VMware? So
other non-Microsoft workloads?
Yeah, Oracle, for example, as that is quite widespread.
Yes, I think, as I said earlier, right, we are on a journey to be a truly enterprise-grade backup product. So we talked to customers, we did a bunch of surveys. The top ask that they had is, first give me VMware VM backup. Next on the list was Oracle. And right behind there was SAP. So yes, that's on something that we're going to go do. It's actually a pretty non-linear investment to do SQL by Oracle backup, but we'll go do that. We think it's what customers want. At the end of the day, if our vision is true where you want one place to manage all your backups, I think that's a gap we'll have to go address. So we will definitely, I wouldn't say no, I wouldn't say when, but yeah, we're definitely going to go plan that.
Any other questions? Okay, there's another question.
Yeah, we tried StoreSimple as a backup target, just as testing, but as soon as I kicked off the backup, the CPU utilization and all the network interface utilization of the StoreSimple just maxed out, and it crashed several times. So I wouldn't recommend using StoreSimple as a target just yet.
Great, thanks for sharing that. That's just an example. It's what you write, the storage pattern. Is the whole device deduplication, the tiering, everything has to do with how you write the I/O. So backup I/O comes in these big bursts when the backup time happens, and it just messes things up. So not the best use case in my frank opinion. Yes?
Is there another technology or another thing we can use to improve bandwidth utilization along besides the duplication and the technologies you have built in?
Well, right now what we have is we allow you to throttle it. We allow you to control the way you use the bandwidth. What we have on the roadmap is also optimize it, like you get more throughput. Like today, we don't get a lot of throughput. Like if you get a very big pipe, we can't saturate it. So that's one of the things we are going to go do, improve that. So if you provision a big network, we'll utilize it.
Could you be more specific?
That's what I thought you were asking, or was it something specific?
Could you be more specific? Like, are you looking for something, or?
Yeah, especially in the company I work for, we have some limitations because we are global. Then not all the sites we have around the world have this good bandwidth to transfer data to the cloud.
Okay.
So that's mine.
So you're really lower bandwidth.
We have some branch offices with, small bandwidth availability. So that's my question. That's why I am asking that.
Yeah, so I think to answer your question, the way we imagine people deploying a cloud backup scenario in that case is use the offline capability, because your first copy where you have to send the full terabyte disk to Azure takes the longest time. So you send that offline, maybe it takes a week for it to go to the data center, and then every backup after that is incremental. So the amount of changes, and it's compressed. So that you can manage even on a small bandwidth. So that's how we imagine people using it in a low bandwidth situation. You would absolutely need to use offline IR for seeding the first copy. And we have that across wherever Azure import-export is available, that integration is available as well. In some cases, you have to send the data to the shipping locations are not all everywhere right now. So for example, in APAC, you have to send it all to Singapore, right? Yeah. So there is some optimization you still need to do there. The receiving locations are not everywhere. So for APAC, you have to send it to Singapore. So if you're in Hong Kong, you still have to send it to Singapore. So that's a little optimization we need to still work out. But yeah, that's how I would recommend you would use it.
Thank you.
Welcome. Oh, sorry.
No.
Go ahead.
So DPM does a great job of backing up Exchange data, but restoring that data is very difficult. Is there any work being done on that area?
What is difficult? Is it getting items back, or is it the whole process is difficult?
Individual items are specific.
Individual items. Yes. Actually, that's an interesting point you made, right? Exchange, bunch of backup products do item level restores. Exchange themselves don't support it. But they basically believe you can restore items within Exchange. So we have this thing about, do you really need a backup for Exchange? There's a constant debate we have within the company between the two groups. And their Exchange team belief is that you don't need backup. But customers of Exchange don't buy that, and they always want backup. So that's a great feedback. What we're going to do is we'll add a voting. We have an Azure voting forum. We'll add that vote on the thing and see how many people vote. And if enough people ask for it, we'll go build it. I mean, it's not something that we can't build, but not many people have asked us for it. So, but yeah, it's a great feedback. We can do that. Thank you. Your question?
So I had a question about the demo that you showed about restoring SharePoint data from Azure. Yeah. And the question is, if I'm restoring something from Azure using the DPM because I have backed it up to Azure, will it have the drawbacks of approach 1 that you have to get the full copy of backup and the egress costs and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What he showed in the demo does have that problem because you have to get the DB back. But since we are going to go build it out like that, we can always share the metadata with the service, and you can do the browsing in Azure. So our goal when we actually build it out would allow you to basically restore an item. In fact, my dream scenario is you could actually attach to a PaaS instance of SQL to browse it in the cloud. That's what we'd like to go do. That's not how it is today. And the reason we think it's a good first step is because, as he mentioned earlier, most of your restore scenarios from Azure before when your entire DB is gone. It's not like when you're looking for one item. So in most cases, and SharePoint guidance is no more than 200 GB per content DB. So we don't think it'll be a huge deterrent to go out to market with that capability. But yeah, absolutely right. We would want to go build that out. And yes, we can.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Great question. We are debating whether to show the demo or not because of that.
I was debating whether to ask the question or not.
No, but that's a great question. We definitely will have that, absolutely.
Any other questions?
All right, guys, there's no more questions. Thank you all for coming again.
Thank you.
And like I said, if you want to see us tomorrow in the focus group, please, you do have to take an hour off your time to come there. But if you want to give us feedback and engage, please take a green card, and it's actually green color, not a green card. Thank you again.